The gunshot that rang out across the dusty streets of Sonora, California, in the summer of 1878 was not what stopped Josiah Parker in his tracks, but rather the woman who stumbled backward from the saloon doors and landed squarely against his chest. She smelled of lavender and desperation, her dark auburn hair falling loose from its pins as she looked up at him with wide green eyes that held more fire than fear. Without a word, she pushed away from him and ran, her worn traveling dress kicking up dust as she disappeared around the corner of the Mercantile. Josiah stood there for a moment, his hand instinctively on his holster, before a burly man with a sheriff's badge burst through those same saloon doors, red-faced and furious. "You see a woman come through here?" the man demanded, though Josiah noticed the badge looked newly pinned and slightly crooked. "Depends on who is asking and why," Josiah replied evenly, his tall frame blocking most of the doorway's view. The man puffed up his chest. "I am Sheriff Grady Mitchell, and that woman is wanted for theft." "What did she steal?" "Her own freedom, apparently," a voice called from inside the saloon, followed by rough laughter. Sheriff Mitchell's face grew redder. "She is contracted to work at the Silver Dollar and she ran out on her debt. That is theft of labor." Josiah knew exactly what kind of contract the sheriff meant. He had seen it before, young women lured west with promises of respectable work as seamstresses or cooks, only to find themselves trapped in saloons and worse, bound by inflated debts they could never repay. His jaw tightened. "I did not see which way she went," he said flatly. The sheriff glared at him, clearly weighing whether to challenge a man who stood 6 feet 3 inches and wore his gun with the ease of someone who knew how to use it. Finally, Mitchell spat into the dust near Josiah's boots and stalked off in the opposite direction from where the woman had run. Josiah waited until the sheriff rounded the corner before walking casually toward his ranch, which sat on 200 acres just outside town. He had built the place up over 5 years of hard work, starting with nothing but a broken-down line shack and a handful of half-wild Mustangs. Now, he ran cattle and bred horses that were sought after throughout the territory. He lived alone in a sprawling ranch house he had built with his own hands, every board and nail a testament to his determination to make something of himself. As he approached his property, he was not entirely surprised to see a flutter of dark blue fabric disappear behind his barn. He continued walking at the same steady pace, not looking directly at the hiding spot as he entered his house through the front door. He moved through the simply furnished main room with its stone fireplace and sturdy wooden furniture, through to the kitchen where he began preparing coffee as if this were any ordinary afternoon. He knew she would be hungry. He knew she would be scared. And he knew that if Sheriff Mitchell had his way, she would be back in that saloon by nightfall, her spirit broken along with any hope of freedom. Josiah set out 2 cups and waited. It was nearly an hour before he heard the soft creak of his back porch step. He did not turn around, just kept slicing the bread he had bought fresh that morning from Mrs. Chen's bakery. The door opened slowly, and he could feel her eyes on him, calculating, weighing her options. "There is coffee in the pot," he said without turning. "And I am making sandwiches if you are hungry." Silence stretched between them like a drawn bowstring. "Why did you lie to the sheriff?" Her voice was softer than he expected, with a hint of an accent he could not quite place. Eastern, perhaps, educated, did not lie. "Said I did not see which way you went. I did not. You were already gone around the corner." He finally turned to face her, keeping his movements slow and unthreatening. Up close, even with dirt on her face and fear in her eyes, she was striking. Not beautiful in the conventional way that men usually meant, but arresting. Strong features, intelligent eyes, and a set to her jaw that spoke of determination. Name is Josiah Parker. This is my ranch. I cannot pay you, she said quickly. I have nothing. Did not ask you to pay me. Asked if you were hungry. She hesitated, then took a tentative step inside. Evelyn Thorne. And yes, I am starving. I have not eaten since yesterday morning. Josiah nodded and continued making the sandwiches, piling them high with beef and cheese. He poured coffee into both cups and gestured to his kitchen table, a solid oak piece he had traded a yearling colt for. Sit. Evelyn remained standing, her eyes darting to the windows. He will not come here, Josiah said. And if he does, he will find only me, working on my ranch like any other day. But you need to eat, and you need to tell me what you are running from so I know what I am dealing with. I told you. The saloon. I was promised work as a bookkeeper when I answered an advertisement in Philadelphia. My parents died last year and I had no other family. The money they left was barely enough to cover their debts. The advertisement said respectable work, room and board, a new start in California. She laughed bitterly. I should have known better. You should not have had to know better. People should not lie. Josiah set a plate in front of the empty chair across from him and sat down with his own. He picked up his sandwich and took a bite, watching her. Evelyn stared at the food like a starving wolf eyeing a rabbit, but still she did not sit. Josiah put down his sandwich and leaned back in his chair. I am going to be straight with you, Miss Thorne. I live alone out here. Have for years. I work hard, I keep to myself, and I do not have time for games. You are clearly in trouble and I am offering to help. But I cannot help someone who will not even sit at my table. You do not understand what you are offering. Sheriff Mitchell has power in this town. If he finds out you are hiding me, let me worry about Sheriff Mitchell. Now sit down and eat before that food gets cold. Something in his tone, not harsh but unyielding, made Evelyn finally move. She pulled out the chair and sat down slowly, as if expecting it to be yanked away from her at any moment. When nothing happened, she picked up the sandwich with trembling hands and took a small, careful bite. Then another. Then she was eating with the desperate hunger of someone who had forgotten what it felt like to have enough. Josiah ate his own meal in silence, giving her space. When she finally slowed down, reaching for the coffee, he spoke again. How much do they say you owe them? $300. For my train ticket, my room, my meals. They charged me for everything at inflated prices. I would have to work there for years to pay it off, and they made it clear what kind of work they expected. Her hands shook as she set down the coffee cup. I would rather die than go back there. You will not have to. Josiah said it with such flat certainty that Evelyn looked up sharply. You cannot possibly pay that kind of money for a stranger. Did not say I would pay it. Said you would not have to go back. He stood and walked to the window, looking out over his land. But we need a plan. Mitchell will not give up easily, especially if the saloon owner is pushing him. Men like that do not like losing their investments. Then what do you suggest? I can hardly stay hidden in your barn forever. No, you cannot. Josiah turned back to face her, an idea forming. But you could stay here in the house, as my employee. I told you I cannot pay, not talking about payment, talking about legitimate work. I do need help, actually. This ranch does not run itself, and I have been managing alone for too long. I need someone to handle the household, help with the books, maybe assist with the horses. You said you were hired as a bookkeeper. Can you actually keep books? Yes. My father was a banker. He taught me accounting, mathematics, even some legal documentation. Perfect. Then you work for me, legitimate wages, room and board. If Mitchell comes around, you are my employee working off a legitimate contract. He will have no claim on you. Evelyn stared at him, hope and suspicion warring in her expression. Why would you do this? You do not know me. I could be a thief. I could be dangerous. Are you? No, but then that is settled. Josiah moved toward the doorway that led to the rest of the house. Come on, I will show you the spare room. It has a lock on the inside of the door. You can use it whenever you want. Your space, your privacy. Evelyn followed him slowly through the house. The spare room was simple but clean, with a real bed, a dresser, and a window that looked out over the rolling hills. It was more than she had dared hope for in months. "Why are you doing this?" she asked again, her voice barely above a whisper. Josiah was quiet for a moment, his hand on the doorframe. "My mother was widowed when I was 12. Man came through town, promised her work in a respectable house in Sacramento. It was not respectable. Took me 3 years to find her and get her out. She never really recovered from those years. Died when I was 18. He looked at Evelyn directly. "I could not save her soon enough, but I can help you, so I will." Evelyn felt tears prick her eyes for the first time since she had fled Philadelphia. "Thank you. Get some rest. Tomorrow we will go into town together and make this official. File the paperwork. Let everyone know you are working for the Parker Ranch. Might not stop Mitchell entirely, but it will make things harder for him." That night, Evelyn lay in the unfamiliar bed, listening to the sounds of the ranch settling around her. She heard Josiah moving around the house, his footsteps steady and sure. She heard horses nickering in the barn, the distant howl of a coyote. For the first time in 6 months, she felt something like safety in his own room at the other end of the house. Josiah sat by his window, watching the moon rise over his land. He had not been entirely honest with Evelyn. Yes, he needed help. Yes, his mother's story was true. But there was something else, something he barely admitted to himself. When that woman had stumbled into him on the street, when he had looked down into those fierce green eyes, he had felt something shift in his chest. Something he had not felt in all his years of building this ranch, of focusing solely on survival and success. He had felt the world suddenly expand, as if there might be room in his life for something more than just work and solitude. But that was foolish thinking. She was running for her life, and he was offering her sanctuary. Nothing more. He could not complicate her situation with his own confusing feelings. Still, as he finally lay down to sleep, he could not help but think about how right it had felt to have someone sitting across from him at his table, sharing a meal in the home he had built with his own hands. The next morning, Josiah was up before dawn as always. He went through his usual routine of feeding the horses, checking on the cattle in the near pasture, and hauling water. When he came back to the house to make breakfast, he was surprised to find Evelyn already in the kitchen, her hair pulled back in a neat bun, wearing the same dress but looking more composed than yesterday. "I hope you do not mind," she said. "I thought I should start earning my keep." She had made coffee and was attempting to cook eggs, though it was clear from the uncertainty in her movements that she was not entirely sure what she was doing. "Have you cooked before?" Josiah asked gently, watching an egg slide precariously close to the edge of the pan. "I have read about it," Evelyn said, then laughed at herself. "That sounds ridiculous, does it not? I can balance a ledger and calculate compound interest, but I cannot cook an egg properly. Here." Josiah moved beside her, careful to keep a respectable distance. "The heat is too high. Turn it down, and you need to keep the eggs moving like this." He demonstrated with the spatula, his movements practiced and efficient. Evelyn watched carefully, then tried again with the next egg. This one turned out better, and she smiled with genuine pleasure at the small victory. They ate breakfast together, falling into an easy silence that surprised them both. When they finished, Josiah stood and reached for his hat. Ready to face the town, Evelyn took a deep breath and nodded. "As ready as I will ever be." The ride into Sonora was tense. Josiah drove the wagon while Evelyn sat beside him, her back straight and her chin up, refusing to look like she was hiding. When they reached the main street, Josiah could feel eyes on them. Word had clearly spread about the woman who had fled the silver dollar. He pulled the wagon to a stop in front of the land office, which also served as the place where work contracts were registered. As they climbed down, Sheriff Mitchell appeared from across the street, his expression darkening when he saw Evelyn. "That woman is coming with me," he announced, moving toward them. "This woman has a name," Josiah said mildly, positioning himself between Mitchell and Evelyn, "and she is here on business. We are registering her employment contract with the Parker Ranch. She already has a contract with the silver dollar. A contract obtained under false pretenses is not valid. Miss Thorne was promised legitimate bookkeeping work. What she found was something else entirely." A crowd was beginning to gather. Josiah noticed several townspeople watching with interest, including Judge Harrison, an older man who had always been fair in his dealings. Mitchell's hand moved toward his gun. "You calling me a liar?" "I am calling the silver dollar's business practices questionable. Miss Thorne is a bookkeeper." "I need a bookkeeper. She is now working for me and we are here to make it legal." Josiah's voice remained calm, but there was steel underneath. "Samuel," Judge Harrison called out, using the sheriff's first name, "let us all settle down. If these folks want to register a contract, that is their right. You know as well as I do that those saloon contracts are not worth the paper they are written on if they were obtained through fraud." "The silver dollar has invested money in her passage," Mitchell protested. "Then they can take it up in court," the judge replied. "But they cannot keep a person against their will. That is called slavery, and last I checked, we fought a war over that." Several people in the crowd murmured agreement. Mitchell looked around, clearly calculating whether he had enough support to push the issue. He did not. "This is not over," he said to Josiah, then turned on his heel and stalked away. Judge Harrison approached them, his weathered face creasing in a kind smile. "Come on inside, young lady. Let us get your paperwork in order." An hour later, Evelyn walked out of the land office with a legal contract stating that she was employed by the Parker Ranch at a wage of $20 a month plus room and board. It was not a fortune, but it was fair pay, and more importantly, it was legitimate. As they walked back to the wagon, several townspeople approached them. Mrs. Chen from the bakery pressed a loaf of fresh bread into Evelyn's hands. "Welcome to Sonora, dear. We need more respectable women in this town." Mr. Anderson, who ran the general store, tipped his hat. "Parker always was a good man. You are in safe hands, miss." By the time they left town, Evelyn was clutching the bread and fighting back tears again. "The people here are not all like Mitchell," Josiah said as they drove home. "Many of them are good folks just trying to build decent lives. They do not approve of the saloon's practices any more than I do." "I did not expect such kindness," Evelyn admitted. "After everything that happened, I had started to think that everyone was cruel, that the whole world was against you. Yes, it is not, though I understand why you would think so." Josiah guided the wagon around a bend in the road. "But you are safe now, Evelyn, I give you my word." The way he said her name, with such quiet certainty, made her feel something she had not expected. She glanced at him sideways, really looking at him for the first time. He was a handsome man, she supposed, though not in a delicate way. His face was weathered from years of outdoor work, his hands calloused and strong. But there was kindness in his eyes, and an integrity in the set of his shoulders that spoke of a man who meant what he said. She realized she was staring and quickly looked away, her cheeks warming. Over the following weeks, Evelyn settled into life at the Parker Ranch. She took over managing the household accounts and was appalled at how disorganized Josiah's record-keeping had been. He was an excellent rancher, but his bookkeeping consisted of random scraps of paper shoved into a drawer. "How do you even know what you are making?" she asked one evening, surrounded by receipts and ledgers she had purchased in town. Josiah looked up from where he was mending a bridle. "I know when I have enough money to get through winter and when I do not. That has been sufficient." "That is not bookkeeping, that is guessing. Has worked so far. You could be making twice as much if you organized properly. Look at this." She spread out papers on the kitchen table. "You sold 3 horses to Mr. Patterson in June, but you never recorded it. And here, you paid for feed you could have grown yourself if you had planned better." Josiah set down the bridle and moved to look over her shoulder. She had created neat columns of numbers, tracking expenses and income with a precision he had never bothered with. "You can figure all that out from these scraps of paper. It is what I was trained to do. Give me another week, and I will have a complete picture of your finances for the past year." She looked up at him, realizing how close he was standing. His presence was warm and solid behind her, and she felt her breath catch slightly. Josiah noticed the change in her expression and stepped back, clearing his throat. "That would be helpful, thank you." But stepping back did not help. He was becoming increasingly aware of Evelyn in ways that had nothing to do with bookkeeping. The way she bit her lower lip when she was concentrating on numbers. The sound of her humming while she worked in the kitchen, gradually learning to cook through trial and error. The sight of her in the morning with her hair loose around her shoulders before she pinned it up for the day. He had given his word that she would be safe here, and that meant safe from him too. She was his employee, under his protection. He could not complicate things by acting on his growing feelings. But then came the evening when everything changed. Evelyn had spent the afternoon trying to make bread, determined to master at least one domestic skill. The first 2 loaves had been disasters, but the third looked promising as it came out of the oven. She set it on the table with tentative pride. "I think I actually did it this time," she announced as Josiah came in from the barn. He washed up and sat at the table, waiting for her to join him as had become their custom. But Evelyn remained standing, suddenly nervous. "What if it is terrible?" she asked. "Then we will feed it to the chickens and try again tomorrow." He gestured to the chair across from him. "Come on, sit." Evelyn sat down and Josiah cut into the bread. It was actually quite good, warm and fragrant. He took a bite and nodded approvingly. "You did it," he said simply. Evelyn beamed, and in that moment, sitting across from each other at his kitchen table with fresh bread between them, Josiah realized he could not keep lying to himself. He was falling in love with this woman. Had been falling since the moment she stumbled into him on that dusty street, if he was honest. Maybe even since he had seen her fierce determination to be free, her refusal to accept the life someone else had tried to force on her. But love was complicated, especially given their circumstances. So he said nothing, just smiled at her across the table and took another piece of bread. The problem was that Evelyn was having similar thoughts. She had noticed that Josiah always waited to eat until she sat down with him. Every single meal, no matter how hungry he must be after a long day of work, he would wait. It was such a small thing, but it spoke volumes about who he was. He saw her as an equal, someone worthy of respect and consideration. She had grown up in a world of strict rules and social hierarchies. Her father had loved her but saw her primarily as a commodity to be married off advantageously. The men who answered her parents' door had looked past her to her father's bank account. The men at the saloon had seen her as something to be bought and used. But Josiah saw her, just her. "Evelyn, With her talent for numbers and her terrible cooking and her determination to build a new life from ashes, it was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. One morning in late August, Josiah came in for breakfast to find the table bare and no sign of Evelyn in the kitchen. Concern immediately knotted his stomach. He moved quickly through the house, calling her name. "Out here," came her voice from the back porch. He found her sitting on the steps, staring out at the sunrise. She had been crying. "What is wrong?" He sat down beside her, careful to maintain some space but close enough that she would know he was there. "I got a letter yesterday. From Philadelphia. My father's lawyer finally tracked me down through the land office records." She held up an envelope. "My parents had more assets than I knew about. A small trust that was not part of the estate settlement. It is not a fortune, but it is enough. Enough to buy a train ticket anywhere I want to go. Enough to start over somewhere new, somewhere far from Sheriff Mitchell and the silver dollar." Josiah felt his heart sink, but he kept his voice steady. "That is good news. You will have options now, freedom to choose your own path." "Yes." She was quiet for a moment. "I could go to San Francisco or Denver, or even back east to Boston or New York. I could start my own bookkeeping business. Live independently." "You could do all those things," Josiah agreed, though each word felt like swallowing glass. "You would be successful too. You have the skills and the intelligence." "I know." She turned to look at him, her green eyes searching his face. "But there is one problem." "What is that?" "I do not want to leave." The words hung between them like a held breath. Josiah did not move, afraid that if he did, the moment would shatter. "I do not want to leave this ranch," Evelyn continued, her voice shaking slightly. "I do not want to leave Sonora. And most of all, I do not want to leave you." "Evelyn," he started to speak, but she held up her hand. "Let me finish. I know this is complicated. I know I came here running for my life and you offered me sanctuary out of kindness. I know I am your employee and you have been nothing but honorable. But I need to say this, even if it ruins everything. These past months have been the happiest of my life. Not because of the ranch or the town, but because of you. Because of the way you wait for me before you eat, like my presence matters. Because of the way you teach me things without making me feel foolish. Because of the way you see me as a whole person, not just a woman to be managed or used." Josiah's throat was tight. "You are not ruining anything. I am in love with you," she said simply. "I think I have been since you lied to the sheriff for a complete stranger. And I needed to tell you, even if you do not feel the same way. Even if this changes everything between us." For a moment, Josiah could not speak. Then he stood up and held out his hand to her. When she took it, confused, he pulled her to her feet and led her back into the kitchen. He gestured to the table. "You know why I always wait for you?" he asked. She shook her head. "Because from the very first meal I knew I never wanted to eat alone again. I knew that having you across from me at this table was exactly how it should be, how it was always meant to be." He moved closer, his calloused hand coming up to gently cup her face. "I have been in love with you since you stumbled into me on that street, Evelyn Thorne. Since you looked up at me with those fierce eyes and refused to be broken by what the world had thrown at you. But I could not say anything. You needed safety, not some lovesick rancher complicating your life." "You are not complicating my life," she whispered. "You are my life. This ranch, this table, this home we have built together, even if we never acknowledged what we were building. This is what I want. Are you sure? Because once we cross this line, I am not letting you go. I have spent 5 years building this ranch, but it was just wood and land until you walked into it. You made it a home. You made it matter." "I am sure," she said. "I have never been more sure of anything." Josiah kissed her then, gentle at first, then deeper as she wrapped her arms around his neck and kissed him back with equal fervor. When they finally broke apart, Both breathing hard, he rested his forehead against hers. "Marry me," he said. "Not because of contracts or protection or any practical reason. Marry me because I love you and I want to spend every day of my life sitting across from you at this table." "Yes," she laughed, tears streaming down her face again, but this time from joy. "Yes, absolutely yes." They were married 3 weeks later in a simple ceremony at the church in Sonora. Judge Harrison officiated, and half the town turned out to celebrate. Mrs. Chen baked the cake. Mr. Anderson decorated the church, and even some of Josiah's neighboring ranchers came in from their spreads to witness the union. Sheriff Mitchell did not attend, but he also did not cause trouble. The Silver Dollar had closed down the month before, its owner having been run out of town after one too many complaints about his business practices. Mitchell himself seemed diminished without his main source of income and influence. Evelyn wore a simple white dress that Mrs. Chen had helped her sew, and she carried wildflowers that Josiah had picked that morning from their property. As she walked down the aisle toward him, Josiah felt his eyes sting with emotion. This woman, this remarkable, brave, beautiful woman had chosen him, had chosen their life together. When Judge Harrison pronounced them husband and wife, the church erupted in cheers. Josiah kissed his bride thoroughly, not caring who was watching, and Evelyn kissed him back with equal enthusiasm. At the reception afterward, held in the church hall, people pressed gifts into their hands. Quilts and dishes, tools and seeds, all the practical things a married couple needed. But the best gift came from an unexpected source. An older woman approached them, well-dressed and clearly prosperous. "Mr. Parker, Mrs. Parker, my name is Margaret Sutherland. I own the large ranch east of here." "I know who you are, Mrs. Sutherland," Josiah said respectfully. "The Sutherland Ranch was one of the most successful in the county. I heard about what you did, helping this young woman escape an untenable situation. It reminded me of my own story. I came west 40 years ago under similar circumstances, and a good man helped me, much as you helped your bride. I never forgot that kindness." She pressed an envelope into Evelyn's hands. "This is a contract for supplying horses to my ranch. I need good breeding stock, and I hear the Parker Ranch has some of the best. Consider it a wedding present and a business opportunity." Evelyn opened the envelope and gasped. The contract was for 20 horses over the next year, at prices that were more than generous. "Mrs. Sutherland, this is too much," Josiah started to protest. "Nonsense. It is good business and it is the right thing to do. Build your ranch, love each other, and maybe help the next person who needs it. That is all I ask." She smiled at them both and walked away, leaving them holding what amounted to a year's worth of income. That night, as they returned to the ranch as husband and wife, Josiah carried Evelyn over the threshold of the house that was now officially theirs together. He set her down gently in the kitchen, and they stood there for a moment, just looking at each other. "Are you hungry?" Evelyn asked with a small smile. "Starving," Josiah admitted. They had been too nervous and excited to eat much at the reception. Together, they prepared a simple meal of bread and cheese and cold chicken. Then they sat at their table, husband and wife, facing each other in the lamplight. "I never thought I would have this," Evelyn said softly. "A home, a partner, a future that I chose for myself." "I never thought I would want it," Josiah replied. "I was content alone, or so I told myself. But that was before you. Before I learned what it meant to have someone to build a life with, not just a ranch." They ate slowly, savoring the moment, neither wanting it to end. When the meal was finished, Josiah stood and held out his hand once more. Evelyn took it, and he led her to the bedroom they would now share, the one he had carefully prepared over the past weeks with new curtains and a wedding ring quilt. Their wedding night was tender and passionate, a physical expression of the love and trust they had built over months of sitting across from each other, learning each other's hearts before exploring each other's bodies. Afterward, wrapped in each other's arms, Evelyn traced patterns on Josiah's chest and smiled. "What are you thinking?" he asked, his voice drowsy and content. "That I ran away from Philadelphia expecting nothing but survival, and instead I found everything I never knew I needed." "Fate is strange that way," Josiah agreed. "I thought I was just helping someone in trouble. Turned out I was meeting my wife." Life at the Parker Ranch settled into a joyful rhythm after the wedding. Evelyn took over not just the bookkeeping but expanded it, finding new markets for their horses and negotiating better prices for their cattle. She had a natural talent for business that complemented Josiah's skills as a rancher. Together, they made the ranch more profitable than it had ever been. But their success came with challenges. Sheriff Mitchell, bitter about losing his influence and income, continued to spread rumors about Evelyn's past. Some people in town listened, questioning whether a former saloon girl, as Mitchell called her, was truly a respectable wife. Evelyn was hurt by the whispers, but Josiah was furious. One afternoon, when he overheard two men gossiping in the general store, he confronted them directly. "My wife was never a saloon girl," he said, his voice dangerously quiet. "She was fraudulently brought here under false pretenses and held against her will until she escaped. There is a significant difference, and the next person who suggests otherwise will answer to me." The men quickly apologized and spread the word that Josiah Parker would not tolerate any disrespect toward his wife. Combined with Judge Harrison's public support and Mrs. Sutherland's endorsement, the rumors gradually died down. But the incident had shaken Evelyn. That night, as they prepared for bed, she was unusually quiet. "Talk to me," Josiah said gently, sitting beside her on the bed. "What if the rumors never stop? What if people always see me as damaged goods, no matter what we accomplish? Then those people are fools and their opinions do not matter." He took her hands in his. "Evelyn, you are the smartest, bravest, most capable woman I have ever known. You survived something that would have broken most people, and you came out stronger. Anyone who cannot see that is not worth our time." "But what about children?" she asked, voicing the fear that had been growing in her heart. "What if we have children and they have to hear those things about their mother? Then we will teach them the truth. We will teach them that their mother was a survivor who refused to be defined by what others tried to force her to be. We will teach them strength and courage by your example." He kissed her forehead. "And we will love them so much that whatever anyone else says will not matter." Evelyn relaxed against him, reassured by his unwavering support. "Do you want children with you?" "Yes, very much," he smiled. "Though I will admit, the thought of a tiny person who might inherit your stubbornness is slightly terrifying." She laughed and swatted his arm. "My stubbornness? What about yours? I prefer to think of mine as determination." "That is the same thing." "Exactly my point." Their laughter faded into comfortable silence, then into passion as they came together with the ease and joy of two people deeply in love. The following spring, Evelyn discovered she was pregnant. She told Josiah one morning at breakfast, nervous about his reaction despite everything he had said. But his face lit up with such pure joy that her fears melted away. "Truly?" he asked, standing up so fast he nearly knocked over his chair. "Truly. The doctor confirmed it yesterday when I went into town." Josiah pulled her into his arms, holding her gently as if she might break. "We are going to be parents. We are going to be parents," she repeated, and suddenly it felt real and wonderful and slightly terrifying. Josiah insisted on doing most of the heavy work around the ranch as Evelyn's pregnancy progressed. even hiring a young ranch hand named Tom to help with the daily chores. Evelyn protested at first, insisting she was pregnant, not an invalid, but eventually accepted his concern as an expression of love rather than a limitation on her abilities. She continued managing the books and even expanded their business further, negotiating contracts with several new buyers. By her 6th month, the Parker Ranch was the most prosperous in the area, and their success had finally silenced most of the negative gossip. Even Sheriff Mitchell had stopped his rumor-mongering, perhaps realizing that the Parkers had more friends and influence than he did. In November of 1879, after a long labor that terrified Josiah and exhausted Evelyn, their son was born. They named him James, and he had his mother's green eyes and his father's strong features. Josiah held his son for the first time with tears streaming down his face, marveling at the tiny, perfect human they had created together. "He is beautiful," he whispered. "He is ours," Evelyn said, equally awed. Those first weeks were difficult, filled with sleepless nights and constant worry. Was the baby eating enough? Sleeping enough? Was that noise normal? Every new parent's fears were magnified by their determination to do everything right, but they figured it out together, just as they had figured out everything else. Josiah would walk the floor with James in the middle of the night, singing old cowboy songs in his deep voice until the baby settled. Evelyn would manage the ranch business from her rocking chair, balancing ledgers with one hand while nursing their son with the other. And every meal, no matter how chaotic things got, they sat across from each other at that kitchen table, sometimes with baby James between them in a basket, maintaining the ritual that had become the foundation of their marriage. As James grew from baby to toddler, the ranch continued to flourish. Josiah and Evelyn added more land, built a bigger barn, and expanded their breeding program. They hired additional help, including a young couple who lived in a small house they built on the property. The Parker Ranch became known throughout California for its quality horses and fair business practices, but they never forgot where they had started. When other women came to Sonora fleeing bad situations, the Parkers quietly offered help. Sometimes it was just a meal and a safe place to stay for a night. Sometimes it was employment or connections to legitimate work elsewhere. They never advertised what they were doing, but word spread through the underground network of people who helped those in need. Judge Harrison died when James was 3 years old, and to everyone's surprise, he left a letter recommending Josiah for the position of deputy sheriff. The new sheriff, a fair-minded man named Carlson, agreed with the recommendation. "I do not know anything about being a lawman," Josiah protested when Sheriff Carlson approached him. "You know about justice and doing what is right. You have proven that multiple times. The rest can be learned." Carlson looked at him seriously. "This town needs good men in positions of authority." "Will you consider it?" Josiah discussed it with Evelyn that night. "It would mean spending more time in town, less time at the ranch. We have good people working here now, and this is important, Josiah. You could help others the way you helped me. You could make sure people like Sheriff Mitchell never abuse their power again. You would not mind. I married a man who stands up for what is right. This is just an extension of that," she smiled. "Besides, it is a steady salary on top of the ranch income. We could finally add that library I have been wanting." So Josiah became Deputy Parker, though he still spent most of his time at the ranch. He only wore the badge when needed, but everyone knew that if you were in trouble and needed help, Josiah Parker was someone you could trust. When James was 5, Evelyn became pregnant again. This time it was a daughter, whom they named Emma. She had her father's dark hair and her mother's sharp intelligence, and from the moment she could talk, She kept everyone on their toes with endless questions. The Parker family was growing, and so was their happiness. But life, as always, brought challenges along with joys. The summer James turned 7, a terrible drought struck the region. Water became scarce and many ranchers lost cattle. The Parkers were better off than most because Josiah had spent years developing a system of wells and water conservation, but they still struggled. What was worse, the drought brought desperate people, and desperate people sometimes did desperate things. Cattle rustling increased, as did robberies and violence. Sheriff Carlson asked Josiah to take on more duties, and he reluctantly agreed, knowing the town needed him. One evening, Josiah came home late from a particularly difficult day. 2 ranches had been hit by rustlers, and he had spent hours tracking the thieves without success. He was exhausted and frustrated, and he almost did not notice that Evelyn had not started dinner yet. He found her in the kitchen, staring at a letter with tears running down her face. Fear shot through him. What happened? Are the children all right? The children are fine. They are playing in their room. She looked up at him, her face anguished. It is from Philadelphia, the lawyer again. There was another trust, a larger one, that was tied up in legal disputes. It has finally been settled. She handed him the letter. Josiah read quickly. The amount was staggering, enough to buy 10 ranches the size of theirs, enough to never have to work again, enough to go anywhere, do anything. This is incredible, he said slowly. We could expand the ranch even more. Or we could invest in other ventures. Or we could leave, Evelyn interrupted. That is what you are not saying. We could take this money and move somewhere where there is no drought, no danger, no memories of the silver dollar or Sheriff Mitchell. Somewhere our children would never have to hear whispers about their mother's past. Josiah sat down heavily at the table, processing this. Is that what you want? I do not know. She sat down across from him, and they looked at each other over the familiar worn wood. Part of me wants to protect our children from everything ugly and difficult. But another part of me knows that running away would teach them the wrong lesson. It would teach them that the opinions of small-minded people matter more than the life you have built. We could give them so many opportunities with that money, Josiah said thoughtfully. Education, travel, choices we never had. We could do that here too. We could hire tutors. We could build a real school for Sonora so all the children have better opportunities, not just ours. Evelyn was warming to the idea. We could use this money to make this place better, not just run away from the hard parts. You are sure? Because if you want to leave, I will go with you without hesitation. My home is wherever you are. My home is here, Evelyn said firmly. At this ranch, at this table, in this life we have built together. The money just gives us the means to build something even better. Josiah reached across the table and took her hands. Then that is what we will do, and they did. Over the next several years, the Parkers became not just successful ranchers, but pillars of the community. They funded the construction of a real schoolhouse and hired trained teachers. They helped struggling ranchers during hard times, offering loans with fair terms instead of letting them lose their land to banks. They expanded their own operation, but also invested in the town itself, helping to bring in a doctor and improve the roads. Emma grew into a sharp-tongued, quick-witted young girl who declared at age 6 that she was going to be a lawyer when she grew up. James became an expert horseman, with a gentle touch that made him invaluable in training the more spirited animals. The Parker children were well loved in Sonora, known for their kindness and their parents' example, but the best times were still the simple ones. Every evening, no matter how busy or successful they became, Josiah and Evelyn sat across from each other at that kitchen table. Sometimes the children ate with them, filling the air with chatter about their day. Sometimes it was just the two of them, holding hands across the wood and talking about their plans, their hopes, their dreams. "You ever regret it?" Evelyn asked one evening when they were alone, the children already in bed. "Taking in that desperate woman who stumbled into you all those years ago." Josiah looked at his wife, at the silver beginning to thread through her auburn hair, at the lines around her eyes from years of smiling. "Not for a single moment. Best decision I ever made was lying to that sheriff." "You always say you did not lie." "I did not, but I would have if necessary," he grinned. "For you, I would have done anything." "You still would you not?" "Absolutely. Though I hope the need for criminal activity in defense of my wife has passed." "Mostly passed," Evelyn agreed, "though I reserve the right to call upon your law-breaking skills if necessary." They laughed together, the comfortable laughter of two people who had built a life on trust and love and mutual respect. When Josiah turned 40, the town threw a celebration in his honor. He had served as deputy for over a decade and had become known throughout the county as a fair and effective lawman. The ranch was thriving, his family was healthy and happy, and he had more friends than he could count. At the celebration, Sheriff Carlson stood up to make a toast. "Josiah Parker came to this town with nothing but determination and built something remarkable. But more than that, he has always stood up for what is right, even when it was difficult. He helped people when others looked away. He built a family on love and respect. And he has shown all of us what it means to be a good man." He raised his glass. "To Josiah Parker." The crowd echoed the toast, but Josiah stood up, looking uncomfortable with all the attention. "I appreciate this truly, but I did not do any of it alone." He found Evelyn in the crowd and held out his hand. She came to stand beside him, puzzled. "This woman, my wife, is the reason for any success I have had. She took a broken, disorganized ranch and made it profitable. She took a lonely man and taught him what family means. She survived something that would have destroyed most people and came out stronger, kinder, and more determined to make the world better. Everything good in my life started the day she stumbled into me on the street, and I lied to the sheriff about seeing which way she went." The crowd laughed and Evelyn blushed. "To Evelyn Parker," Josiah said, raising his glass to her. "The bravest person I know." "To Evelyn Parker," the crowd echoed. That night, as they returned home in their wagon with James and Emma dozing in the back, Evelyn leaned against Josiah's shoulder. "That was quite a speech," she said. "It was the truth. We make a good team, the best team." He kissed the top of her head. "Though I maintain my contribution of lying to law enforcement was significant, not lying, you never saw which way I went." "Exactly, I am a very honest criminal." Their laughter woke the children, who wanted to know what was funny. The ride home was filled with silly jokes and stories, the kind of ordinary magic that made up their life together. When James turned 15, he started courting a girl from town, the daughter of the schoolteacher they had helped hire years ago. Emma, at 12, declared that romance was silly, and she would never waste her time on such nonsense. Josiah and Evelyn exchanged knowing looks, remembering their own protestations about love before it found them. "Never say never," Evelyn advised her daughter. "I am different," Emma insisted. "I have plans. I am going to law school in San Francisco and become the first female attorney in California." "You might be right," Josiah said, "but you also might find that plans change when you meet the right person." "Did your plans change?" Emma challenged. "I did not have plans," Josiah admitted. "I had a ranch and a lot of work. Then your mother arrived and suddenly I had a reason for all that work. I had someone to build a future with, not just survive day to day." Emma considered this, but remained unconvinced. She was young yet, and could not imagine anything being more important than her ambitions. But 2 years later, when a young lawyer came to town to set up practice, Emma discovered that perhaps her parents had been right after all. She met Daniel Martinez in the library she had helped convince her parents to fund, and they argued passionately about legal precedents for an hour before realizing they were actually agreeing with each other. Josiah watched his daughter fall in love with amusement and a bit of panic. "She is too young," he said to Evelyn. "She is the same age I was when I met you. That is different." "How? Because she is my daughter and I am not ready for this." Evelyn laughed and patted his arm. "None of us are ever ready, but Emma is smart and careful. She will make the right choices." And she did. Emma and Daniel courted properly for 2 years while she finished her studies. Then she shocked everyone by becoming the first woman to attend law school in San Francisco, with Daniel's full support and encouragement. They married after her graduation, and Daniel joined her in setting up the first law practice in Sonora run by a husband and wife team. James married his sweetheart, Sarah, and they took over the daily operations of the ranch, allowing Josiah to focus more on his deputy work and Evelyn to manage their various business investments. The young couple moved into the foreman's house, and soon the ranch echoed with the laughter of grandchildren. Josiah was 50 when he decided to finally retire from being a deputy. Sheriff Carlson had long since retired himself, and the new sheriff was a younger man who did not need Josiah's help anymore. The town was more settled now, less wild, and the kind of problems that required Josiah's particular skills were rare. On his last day wearing the badge, he came home to find Evelyn waiting for him on the porch, just as she had been waiting all those years ago when she was running for her life. "How does it feel?" she asked as he unpinned the badge and handed it to her. "Strange. Good. Right." He sat down beside her. "I am looking forward to spending more time at home with you." "We are getting old," Evelyn observed, though not sadly. At 46, she was still beautiful to him, perhaps even more so with the wisdom and experience written in her face. "We are getting older," Josiah corrected, "but we are getting older together, which is all that matters." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sun set over the land they had built together. In the distance, they could see James working with the horses, his son perched on the fence watching. Closer to the house, Emma was visiting with her own children, twin girls who were already showing signs of their mother's fierce intelligence and determination. "You ever think about that day?" Evelyn asked. "The day I ran into you." "Every day," Josiah admitted. "Every single day I thank whatever fate or fortune or divine intervention sent you stumbling into my arms. I thought I was running toward survival. I did not know I was running toward my whole life." Maybe that is how it works. We think we are running away from something, but really we are running toward exactly where we need to be. Evelyn took his hand, their fingers intertwining with the ease of decades of practice. "I would not change a single thing. Not the fear, not the struggle, not the hard times, because all of it led to this, to us, to this life we built. Even the terrible cooking at the beginning," Josiah teased, "even that, though I maintain the bread was not that bad. The first loaf could have been used as a doorstop. But the third one was perfect." "It was," he agreed. "Just like everything else, we figured it out together." As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, they went inside to their kitchen table, where a simple dinner was waiting. They sat across from each other, as they had for nearly 25 years, and shared a meal in the home they had built together. The years continued to pass, bringing both joys and sorrows as they always do. Josiah's back started aching on cold mornings, and Evelyn needed spectacles to do her bookwork. But they remained active and engaged in their community, watching their children and grandchildren thrive. When Josiah turned 60, the town held another celebration, this one marking 40 years since he had first come to Sonora. The ranch was now run entirely by James and Sarah, with Emma handling all the legal affairs. The Parker name was synonymous with integrity and success throughout California. But what Josiah treasured most was not the success or the respect. It was the quiet evenings at home with Evelyn, still sitting across from each other at that same kitchen table, still talking about their day, still holding hands like newlyweds. 40 years, Evelyn marveled one evening. 40 years since I ran into you on that street. Best thing that ever happened to me, Josiah said immediately. Even including finding that gold nugget in the creek when you were 25. Even including that, though the nugget was a close second. She laughed, the sound still as beautiful to him as it had been the first time he heard it. I love you, Josiah Parker. I have loved you since you refused to eat until I sat across from you at your table. I would have starved to death if you had not, he said seriously. And I mean that literally and figuratively. Before you, I was just surviving. With you, I learned how to live. They were 70 and 66 respectively when Josiah fell ill. It was not sudden or dramatic, just the slow decline that sometimes comes with age. Evelyn nursed him with the same fierce determination she brought to everything, refusing to accept that their time together might be ending. You are not allowed to leave me, she told him one day, her voice shaking. We have plans. Emma's girls are getting married next year. James is talking about expanding into breeding cattle. We have grandchildren to spoil. I know, Josiah said weakly. He was in bed, too tired to get up anymore. I am fighting, love, but I need you to promise me something, anything. If I do not make it, you have to keep living. Really living, not just going through the motions. You have to keep sitting at that table even if I am not across from you. You have to keep engaging with life. Do not talk like that, Evelyn said, tears streaming down her face. You are going to be fine. But he was not fine. 3 days later, surrounded by his wife, his children and his grandchildren, Josiah Parker died peacefully in his sleep. His last words were, I love you, directed at Evelyn, who was holding his hand. The funeral was the largest Sonora had ever seen. People came from all over California to pay their respects to a man who had touched so many lives. But for Evelyn, it was all a blur. The man who had saved her, loved her, built a life with her was gone, and she felt as if half of herself had died with him. For weeks after the funeral, she could not bring herself to eat at the kitchen table. She would take her meals in her room or standing by the window, unable to face that empty chair across from where she sat. Emma and James were worried, watching their mother fade in her grief. It was her granddaughter, Emma's daughter Grace, who finally broke through. Grace was 15 and fierce like her grandmother had been at that age. Grandmother, she said one morning, finding Evelyn standing by the window with an untouched breakfast tray. Grandfather would be very disappointed in you right now. Evelyn turned, shocked by the bluntness. What? He made you promise to keep living. That means eating properly at the table, not standing by windows feeling sorry for yourself. Grace, Emma scolded her daughter. But Evelyn was looking at the young girl with new eyes. You are right, she said slowly. He did make me promise, and I am breaking that promise. Then stop breaking it, Grace said simply. Come eat breakfast with me at the table. Tell me stories about grandfather. Help me understand what made your love so special. So Evelyn went to the table and sat in her usual spot. Grace sat across from her, in Josiah's chair, and they shared a meal. And as Evelyn told stories about how she and Josiah had met, how he had protected her and loved her and built a life with her, she felt some of the grief begin to ease. It did not go away. She would miss Josiah every day for the rest of her life. But she remembered her promise, and she kept living. She continued managing the family's business affairs. She continued helping people who needed it. And every morning, she sat at that kitchen table, sometimes alone, sometimes with her children or grandchildren, and she remembered all the meals she had shared there with the man who had refused to eat until she sat across from him. Evelyn lived another 12 years, remaining sharp and engaged until the very end. She saw her great-grandchildren born, saw Emma become one of the most respected attorneys in California, and saw James turn the Parker Ranch into a legacy that would last for generations. When she died at age 78, peacefully in her sleep like her husband before her, her last thoughts were of Josiah waiting for her at a table, ready to share one more meal together. The Parker Ranch continued to thrive under James's leadership, and then under his children. The family tradition of helping those in need, of standing up for what was right, passed down through the generations. The kitchen table where Josiah and Evelyn had shared so many meals became a treasured family heirloom, passed down to Emma, who eventually donated it to the Sonora Historical Society, with the stipulation that it be accompanied by the story of her parents' great love. And so the story of a desperate woman who stumbled into a cowboy's arms, and the cowboy who refused to eat until she sat across from him at his table, became part of the legend of the Old West. Not a tale of gunfights and glory, but of something more important and lasting. A story of love and respect, and two people who found in each other exactly what they needed to transform survival into a life worth living. In the Historical Society's display, the table is accompanied by a simple plaque that reads, "At this table, Josiah and Evelyn Parker shared meals, made plans, raised children, and built a love that lasted a lifetime." Their legacy reminds us that the greatest adventures are not always about taming wild frontiers, but about opening our hearts to unexpected possibilities and having the courage to sit down together and share our lives. And though more than a century has passed, people still visit that table and read that plaque, touched by a love story that began with a lie to a sheriff and a refusal to eat alone. They are reminded that sometimes the best things in life come from the most unexpected encounters, and that true love is not about grand gestures, but about the small, daily choices we make to honor and cherish the people who sit across from us at our tables. The Parker name remains well known in California, not just for the successful ranch and business empire they built, but for the example they set of integrity, compassion, and enduring love. Every generation tells the story of how it all began, keeping alive the memory of a woman brave enough to run toward freedom, and a man wise enough to wait for her to sit down before he would eat. And somewhere, in whatever comes after this life, Josiah and Evelyn Parker sit across from each other at their table once more, sharing eternity the way they shared those precious years on earth together, always together, exactly as it was meant to be.